I'll save you some time. If you've been searching for the magic behind the secret of The Prestige, it's definitely the writing. Howdy. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, Senior Editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, and we were really excited to have Jonathan Nolan with us for the screening of The Prestige. Unfortunately, we sold out this screening, and I felt really bad because we had to turn away 150 people at the theater. I hate doing that. I hate turning anyone away. So if you're tuning in because you didn't get in, I'm glad you're still able to hear the Q&A through the podcast. I apologize. Generally only happens about, 2 or 3 times a year. Almost always, most of the folks that come to our screenings get in, as long as you get there at a reasonable time. Don't show up 5 minutes beforehand. But anyhow, all apologies again. It was so popular, of course, because we had Jonathan Nolan, who this is the first time he's officially co-written with his older brother, Christopher Nolan. They co-wrote this film together, and of course, Christopher Nolan directed it. You should hopefully be familiar with Christopher Nolan's work through Memento, Batman Begins, The Following. Jonathan served as a creative consultant on Batman Begins, but it was cool that, this is their first official gig together. So there were a lot of interesting things to discuss in this Q&A. Speaking of upcoming Q&As, we have Michael Arndt, the writer of Little Miss Sunshine, next week, October 24th. If you have a question that you would like to ask Michael, you could ask it. Just get that email into me with a subject line that says, Little Miss Sunshine question. You could email it to rsvp@creativescreenwriting.com, and if you have a good question, I'll try and ask it. Obviously skip the stuff that I'm going to ask, how he broke in, how the film was set up, stuff like that. So if you've seen the film and you have a question, send it in. As long as I get it before October 24th, I will do my darndest to ask it. We have lots of other great episodes coming up. I can't go into all of them now. Catch a Fire, the apartheid movie, is also going to be another upcoming episode. And thanks a lot to everybody that's been tossing in virtual tips into our virtual tip jar via PayPal.com. We set up this virtual tip jar at our blog, www.creativescreenwritingmagazine.blogspot.com. If you dig an episode and you've been enjoying listening to the podcast, feel free to throw in a virtual tip. It helps us pay for the equipment, the tapes, the cameras, the tripods, the stuff we still need to buy to keep the podcast going. And hey, it was very exhausting. This screening of The Prestige was the night before the first day of our expo. I am already exhausted after the first day of our expo, and we still have 3 more days to go. So without further ado, we're going to cut right to the stage where we welcomed co-writer Jonathan Nolan to discuss his film, The Prestige. Okay, as is our tradition, here's your very own copy of Creative Screenwriting Magazine with Prestige listed boldly on the cover. Boldly.
With the fountain right there.
Yes, with the fountain right in the middle, so it's a magical kind of cover. But the story turned out great, and we're really happy with it. As always, we're going to start moderated, then we're going to open it up to our guests. A lot of times we talk about breaking in stories. Everybody knows that your brother, obviously, is Christopher Nolan, but not as many people might know that you came up with the story which helped put Chris on the map, Memento Mori, for the film Memento, which you pitched to Chris as a part of your road trip from Chicago to Los Angeles when Chris was moving out here. Could you talk about kind of being a writer, because Chris's path was always film, as you've told our magazine, and yours was always to be a writer. Could you talk about that path that you took and how Memento kind of boiled, which was your first foray into film?
I think that because my older brother wanted to be a film director since he was about 6 years old, I never thought filmmaking was kind of his thing. So the writing to me was always my interest, but I didn't think that I didn't think I would wind up having anything to do with film. Because that was Chris's thing. But when the idea for Memento, the short story, came to me, I'd taken some time off school, off of college, and I was traveling a bit. As soon as I started working with the idea, it became pretty quickly apparent to me that it was, if inspiration had struck with the wrong brother. It felt like more of a cinematic story. And I'm very proud of the short story that I was able to write. But right from the beginning, the idea of this guy who's covered in tattoos, who has to consult his own body as a kind of roadmap to where he's going, seemed more cinematic than something for a short story.
And that became Chris's second film. His first film was The Following.
Yeah.
Was there ever consideration when you pitched him that story of Memento Mori for you to join him as the screenwriter of the movie?
No, I was still going to college at the time. My parents had convinced me to go back to school. I pitched Chris the idea for Memento on a road trip when he was moving out to Hollywood in '97. I had our dad's car in D.C., so I thought we'll take a nice long road trip from Chicago to L.A. and we ran out of things to say to each other about halfway across. So I decided pitching him this short story idea that I'd come up with, and so I just sort of I sort of said, well, look, here's what I'm trying to develop right now. It seemed like it would make a really neat movie, so why don't you try to do what you can with it? I went back to school, and about 3 months later, he called me up on the phone. He was all excited. He said, I figured it out. I'm going to tell the screenplay backwards. I said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I let it sink in for a couple of days, and then I realized it was actually he'd stumbled upon the perfect way to sort of strand people in Leonard's condition.
Was there a vetting process? Did he give you drafts of the script to read that you kind of said, yeah, nah, don't do that?
Well, he's my big brother, so I have to be a little more diplomatic than that. But I've always read his scripts. I remember reading Following probably more than 10 years ago now. And so I read the drafts of Memento as they refined. I think the first one was probably 190 pages long. We always write long. I've discovered it runs in the family. I'm trying to write a script right now on the Chicago fire, and I think it's the last time I counted. It's probably going to come in about 220 pages.
Little cutting to do.
little bit of cutting to do. But Memento. His script for Memento was surprising. Now I can look back now. At the time, I had nothing to gauge it against. But at the time, the script, although it came in long and there was material, sadly, that was cut from it, it came out pretty fully formed right from the beginning. He just, I think he went up the coast, a little like Leonard Shelby. He drove up the coast in his Honda and stayed in different hotels and just kept working until it was done. And you had to cut. There's a lot of the Sammy Jenkins material that got cut. Unfortunately, there was a whole bunch of great material that he developed for that there just wasn't time for.
Do you want to talk about a scene just because everybody loves Memento?
He'll kick my butt.
Really?
Well, I think there's a thing with Chris and myself too. It seems to be in vogue now, especially with DVDs and new technology, to sort of pile all of the materials from a film into the DVD and make them all available to the audience and to people who love it.
Deleted scenes, script excerpts, right?
Script excerpts, and I think to a certain extent, although as a fan, I'm a huge fan of films, I always have been, you kind of want to get your hands on everything. I remember when I was a kid getting Star Wars sketchbooks and pretty much trying to get my hands on every piece of material for that set of films that I could, and that only heightened the experience, seeing the sketches that they put together for the AT-ATs and all that kind of stuff. That just made it even better. But somehow, it seems like now there's a little too much of that, where I think Chris's vision of how a film should sort of exist is pretty much, once you're done with it, you put it together, you get it out there, and that's kind of it.
Hopefully eventually you guys will publish that. Because I fully understand an artist's vision of saying the film is the final document. I don't want to talk about the rest. But there is a process, and as you just mentioned, you've tapped in on it when you were looking at The Art of Star Wars. They've published the annotated screenplays of all the Star Wars scripts, which have differences. Maybe one day, when more time has passed, you guys will do that with some of your own work, kind of to look back. But so you can't say any scenes, man. You're just going to hang us out to dry with the Sammy Jenkins.
I can't do it. I'm bigger, all right. I'm bigger than my brother, but he's meaner than me.
He's meaner. Now, by now, everybody's figured out you and your brother don't exactly talk alike.
No, very different.
Just got to bring it up. So what's the age difference? And tell us about how your family was living in England and then came to America.
Chris is a lot older than I am. That's what I've taken to saying at this point. But we have the same parents. They're still happily married. They live in England, and I lived in England until I was 11 years old. When we were 11, for my mom's work and my dad's work, we decided... My mom's an American, my dad's a Brit. They met in Chicago 40 years ago. And then shortly after they got married, my dad surprised my mom by insisting that they move back to England, which was a bit of a shock for her. And ever since then, they've sort of argued about where they should live, and it's gone back and forth and back and forth. And I caught the American leg of the tour, and Chris caught the English leg of the tour. That was the idea.
Now, as a writer... Obviously, you didn't join Chris on Memento, so we're heading into the post-Memento stages. Tell us about what.
Well, I worked on Memento as a production assistant.
Sorry. I mean, as a writer.
I'm very proud of that. I was a grip on following. I was a PA on Memento. I came out. I just graduated school, and I wanted to come out and learn the ropes. I said, "Can you get me a job on set?" And he said, "Sure." We got a set PA job. It's opening up. For the first 2 weeks of production, no one put it together. We don't really. My mom was saying this morning, you look exactly like each other, but about me and my brother, but there are enough differences that people don't see it immediately. For the first 2 weeks, no one put it together. And then I woke up one morning. The camera truck had been off all weekend, so they'd given me all of the crew's radios to charge up over the weekend. And I woke up, my phone was ringing, and I'd missed call by 2 hours, and the entire crew's radios were lined up around my bedroom. And the second AD was on the phone. I can't repeat what she said to me, but when I didn't get fired, that's when people began to say.
So the last name Nolan didn't cue anybody off, I guess?
It did then. Chris told the AD, he said, go ahead and fire him. But they let me stick around.
What was the most important thing that you think you learned from that set, and have you ever considered directing?
I love being on set. I do. One of the sad ironies of having a little bit of success as a screenwriter is they don't let you go on the set very much after that. So I do miss it. I'm not the type. I don't enjoy going to visit the set because having worked on a bunch of sets, I go down there and you can feel the exhaustion of the people down there. But I think in terms of the directing thing. Like I said, I grew up with my brother as the film director, so it never really felt like an option to me. And certainly, I don't have the kind of single-mindedness about it that Chris does. I still feel like I have a lot to learn about writing. Someone asked me about this earlier in the week, and I was saying that if you hang in there and you have enough luck as a screenwriter, eventually they will give you a chance to make a fool out of yourself by directing a film. And I fully hope to take advantage of that, but. I got some work to do first.
This project has a long history. The fantasy award-winning novel by Christopher Priest was published, I believe, in 1995.
Yeah, 95, 96, something like that.
Yeah, and this project, I think, to my knowledge, please clear it up, started sometime shortly after Memento was completed. Could you talk about the long history from getting the rights to the book to you and Chris finally deciding to write together?
Yeah, my brother was going over to England to do publicity for Memento. We released Memento in England first in October of 2000 because we couldn't find a U.S. distributor. They all watched the movie and told us we were nuts. So it got released.
Wait, go back. So they would not give a distribution to it in Britain?
No, distribution. The way we put that movie together...
Because it was through Newmarket, right?
Newmarket put it together with a financing scheme that was in vogue at the time. It was kind of popular at the time, where you'd get your foreign pre-sales. Sorry, you'd figure out how much money you would be able to sell the film for foreign, and you budget just below that number. So you pretty much start out with a film that was already in the black, and then whatever you made domestic, whatever you were able to sell the film for domestically for domestic distribution would be your profit. And that was going just fine. Chris bought the film in under budget and on time and all that stuff, and then we showed it to all these U.S. distributors, and they sort of scratched their heads and said no. So we took it to festivals, and Newmarket decided they liked the movie enough that they would just kind of take the initiative and distribute it themselves. So we had sort of a fair share of ups and downs right from the beginning.
Which is amusing because it ended up getting an Academy Award nomination both for editing and for you and Chris for screenwriting. Yeah.
And I really feel like we earned those nominations because we sure didn't buy them. Because we could, there's a lot of money that goes into Academy campaigns, and that's a whole kind of little mini industry of all its own, which we couldn't avail ourselves of.
So when did Prestige enter the process?
So Chris went to England to do publicity on Memento, and I tagged along. Valerie Dean, who's one of the producers on the film, had sent him this book. You get sent a lot of stuff. Even back then, I wasn't getting sent any stuff as a PA, but Chris was getting sent plenty of stuff. And a lot of it is not a good fit. This just seemed right up Chris's alley, right up, right in the ballpark of what we were interested in. So he sort of told me the story. He'd read the book, and we were taking a walk in my parents' part of London, which is called Highgate. There's a cemetery there called Highgate Cemetery, and we were kind of loosely walking around it. Highgate Cemetery became the setting. We didn't get to shoot there, but it's the setting for Angier ransoming Borden's engineer back to him. Chris was telling me about this book that he had been sent, and so even before I read the book, it was presented to me as a story, which is very helpful because Chris had already kind of broken down the story and was, when you tell someone a story, you have to completely kind of rewrite it as you're telling it because all these fancy narrative techniques that you use in films and books don't really pass muster when you're just telling someone a story.
This is interesting because this is the inverse of what you did with Memento, in which you told him the story.
Yeah, we turned it around. It was nice. When he was telling me someone else's story, he was telling me Christopher Priest's story. And that was really helpful because it was very... in hindsight, it was a tricky adaptation. I like to think it was a somewhat simple adaptation because as soon as I read the book, you realize, well, there's no way you can make a movie out of that. I mean, there's so much stuff going into that book. There's so many ideas and such a density to it and a richness to it that there's no way you could fit all that into the projector. So you knew you had to cut right from the beginning. I mean, it just kind of gave you license to say, right, I got to throw everything out and start building. With the blocks of what you liked from the book.
So when did the idea come about that you were going to actually join him as a screenwriter?
Well, so fast forward another year, Memento had come out. The option finally got to a point. They were keeping an eye on the option for that book, and it became available. So Newmarket jumped in there and grabbed it. And I think it was probably the fall of 2001 that Chris said, "Look, I'm busy." He was in post-production on Insomnia at that point. And he said, if you want to take a whack at it, go for it. And obviously, I was up for it. I didn't realize quite what an undertaking it was asked. It took years to get the adaptation together. We took a little break from it when we were working on Batman, but
on Batman Begins, you served as a creative consultant, not officially a screenwriter.
More like my brother's assistant, really. Back to getting him coffee. And I've just finished working on the sequel, which we're hopefully going to get up and running in January or February next year.
But so tell me about those first steps for yourself as a screenwriter while your brother was away working on Insomnia. Was there any prep you did, or did you just dive in?
I got signed up for the job, and I went home and I waited for them to send me the instruction booklet for... how do I turn this crazy book into a movie? And it never came. So after a few weeks, I decided, all right, well, I'll just start working. And the way Chris and I work together is we don't write drafts together. We tried that one time. It was not pretty. We tend to write sequential drafts and sort of bounce them back and forth at each other. But we talk a lot before getting started. On this script, there was a lot of conversations about how you could try to keep the modern. For those of you who've read the book, and I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic book, especially if you've just seen the movie. There's a modern-day framing device in it, which is great, and we tried very hard to hold on to it.
That device is that it's really not taking place in the past. It's the grandsons and the sons of the magicians reading the diaries later, correct?
The grandchildren are the great-grandchildren
right.
of the magicians, and they are sort of unearthing this peculiar family history and trying to sort of investigate this feud between their families. And it's great stuff, and it gives the story this nice epic feel to it. But we realized, to try to get in a movie that was anything approximating a reasonable running time, you kind of want to concentrate on these guys and their immediate story. You lose some of that scope, but I think ultimately the film does the book justice by trying to just do what it can. Take the elements from the book that we can actually do justice to in 2 hours and try to nail those. So you lose some of that scope, but hopefully you gain the idea that this is a kind of puzzle that these guys are creating. It's a trap they're building that's going to suck them both in at the end.
The film has a great structure. So obviously I would think that when you guys sat down, structuring it, outlining it, note carding would be part of that early process. Was it, and could you talk about just before you hit the pages, the prep you did to lay out your story?
We did a lot of talking about it. I think we discovered, and at the time it was new to me because I'd never done this before, and each script seems to be different, seems to work differently. all the talking in the world isn't going to help you as soon as you start actually, trying to do these things. So the narrative, the sort of fractured narrative in this script evolved through drafts and across, my rewriting and his rewriting. The element of the journals, the kind of interwoven journals where one guy is reading the other guy's journal about the other guy reading the other guy's diary, I had to pull it out because I couldn't find a way to make it work. And then Chris eventually was able to work it back in on his last pass before we got it together, it's very gratifying. Like I said, the way we started this was to throw everything out, just throw it all out, because there's no way to get it all into the script. And then you kind of sit there and watch as it comes sort of creeping back into the script, as if you could never have gotten rid of it in the first place, and that diary thing made its way back in, which is gratifying to see because it's a cool device.
So how long would you say you spent on either outline or note cards before you started writing, or was there no time?
I tend to, I should probably be more disciplined in this, but I tend to bounce back and forth in the early stages. I'll get tired of trying to outline and try to write a scene to get a sort of a foothold into the script, and work on scenes for a little bit, and then come back to the outline, and then it refines itself. My process, I tend to go back and forth, and it's changed with every film. On this one, really from the beginning, early on, I gave up on the idea of trying to outline too much and just started jumping into the writing. The structure tended to work. I had an idea from the very beginning that I thought, well, Chris had come to me and said that he wanted the film to work as a magic trick. He wanted the film itself to work like a magic trick.
And it does in a way, because it does have Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, the pledge, the turn, the prestige.
I made all that stuff up. So there's no magic history there. That all the three parts of a magic trick is just.
But the way it's laid out, it's great.
Yeah,
it makes
has
sense.
a nice sort of analog to film structure, and as a sort of as a beginning writer, you sort of. It was nice to sort of lay those points out and say, okay, well, I can structure it that way. The structure of the interwoven 3-act structure is something Chris did in his first feature, Following. You got glimpses, snippets of each act right up from the beginning, and they were delineated to you, or you could tell where you were by the amount by the lead actor's haircut and the amount of bruises on his face, which was a kind of nice device. The same thing happens to a certain degree in Memento with black and white and color stock. In this one, the idea was, let's try to have some fun with it. Narrative structure is, I think, for a segment of the audience, you can't make everyone happy. I've been reading some of our reviews. Some of the reviewers not happy. Rex Reed in particular, not very.
Don't take the reviews too seriously, man. You did a great job.
Thank you. But some people don't want that from a movie. I think in Rex's review, he says movies shouldn't be hard work. Fair enough. No, that's fine. I mean, I get it. Some movies should. There's a lot of people in this world, and luckily, if you don't spend a lot of money on your movie, you don't have to make everybody happy. You can make a movie that I think with Memento in particular, the wager was. You can make a movie that's complicated. You can make a movie that has a game-like aspect to it. And there's an audience out there for this. This is what we thought from the very beginning. The studios disagreed, so they wouldn't distribute the film. And then eventually you get it out there, and surprise, 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 there is an audience for it. It may not be a huge audience, who knows. But
as you just said, this is complicated, but it all adds up if you pay attention. I mean, it's very smart. How hard was it to set this up once your script was done? Did you have a completed draft that kind of reflects what we see on the screen, and then somebody greenlit it, or was it a work in progress that, based on good faith in Chris Nolan, people picked it up?
Well, I think Newmarket had optioned the book, so we knew Newmarket was in there, willing to go. And then as soon as my draft was done, the nice thing about being a writer is they leave you out of most of these conversations about the money and the specifics and the details, which is nice. I don't remember exactly how it all went down, but Disney and Warner Brothers picked it up from a pretty early point. There was a point in 2003 where we were going to try to make this movie with a different cast and a very different draft, but Batman kind of got in the way. So we set the script aside for a couple of years. It was actually really great because you come back to a script after a couple of years and you have a real perspective on it. You're almost able to give it a cold read. So Chris came back to it after Batman was all done and took a look at it again and said, all right, well, if we do this and that, I think the idea was the biggest shortcoming in my draft had been the female characters. I'd given them sort of short shrift in trying to concentrate on the main protagonist and their kind of battle back and forth. So every rewrite after that concentrated on trying to really develop those characters and give them, instead of using them as plot devices, give them a real sort of flesh and bone quality that hopefully is there in the final product.
Well, and it was welcome that you didn't try too hard to put a love story in here. I mean, there's nuances of a love story, obviously, but it's an unfulfillment, kind of like the satisfaction is all they care about is what happens on stage.
One of the ideas with these guys, and I think it's wonderfully portrayed by Hugh in a particular moment in the script, in the film, where you realize these guys aren't interested in love. That's not what they're interested in. They're obsessed with something very different, and they are obsessed to a degree with each other and with this sort of one-upmanship. And so the love affair in there has a cursory quality to it because they're not interested. Scarlett's character becomes another way that Hugh's character can root out the truth of what Borden has been doing, how he's been doing his trick. That's all they care about.
It's hard to make a movie like that. What was the budget for this film?
They don't tell me those things either. I think
I'm allowed to say 40. That's the number we were going after.
That sounds like what I heard too.
How many days did Chris shoot it in? Just out of curiosity.
You know what, Jordan? Do you remember? I don't remember. Our associate producer is here trying to keep a low profile.
Any clue on how many months now? 57 days. Wow, so that's great.
Memento was about 25, but Batman was like 900.
I asked you earlier about the vetting process. Obviously, Chris has taken you onto this project for your first collaboration together as screenwriters. What happens between you two? The whole film's about rivalry. Were there ever any times of sibling rivalry when Chris is giving you a note you don't want, and you're like, "Hey, damn it, he's the director. What am I going to do with this note?"
Well, like I said, I'm about 40 pounds heavier than he is, so if it really comes down to it, I have some natural advantages. But we got asked the sibling rival. We did the press junket last weekend for this film, and I got asked the sibling rival. For the first time ever, they actually wanted to ask me questions, which was mystifying to me. But they did ask once or twice about the sibling rivalry thing. And one of the cool things about, there's an age difference there. Like I said, a vast chasm of years between us. One of the nice things about the fact that he grew up in England, going to English high school and English college, and I grew up in American. I lived in Chicago and went to high school there and school in college in D.C. We don't have any of the usual markers that we could compete with. SAT scores, grades, sports. We didn't play any of the same sports. We didn't take any of the same standardized tests. We didn't. So there's no real way to compete, which was kind of nice. And also because Chris was going to boarding school a lot, we didn't really develop a friendship with each other until a little later in life. He would the thing I remember mainly about my sort of chief memories of my brother when I was a kid, he would come back from school 2 or 3 times a year, and he would take me down to Leicester Square to go watch movies. And in fact, someone was asking me about this the other day. I was saying one of the movies I remember him taking me to go see was Labyrinth, which had David Bowie in it, which was kind of cool to get back there.
Could try dodging the question, but there had to be a time when you guys didn't agree on something.
Oh no, I wasn't trying to dodge the question.
Okay.
We disagree all the time, and in fact, most sort of notoriously on Memento, we took it to Venice, and we're very nervous. We hadn't shown it to anyone except friends and family, who have to say they like it, even if they think it's terrible. We took it to Venice and at the Venice Film Festival, and we screened it in a theater. I can't remember the name of it, but it's out in the Lido, and it's enormous. It seats like 2,000, 3,000 people. Humongous. And the Italians, they make everything very, very fancy. You really feel intimidated the second you show up there with your kind of crazy backwards movie. And our folks were there. My oldest brother, Matt, was there, and we all went to the screening. The Venice Film Festival is famous for having very, very frank audiences. They're very straightforward. If they don't like the movie, they stick around to boo and throw things at you. So my dad and I were seated down in the middle of the main section watching the movie, and we get to the end. Memento ends fairly abruptly. The credits are rolling. We sit there for 30 seconds, and there's no applause. There's no sound of any kind. And I turned to my dad, and I said, let's get out of here. And then people started clapping, and it was a really, really well-received film, and it was such a sort of, you breathe this massive sigh of relief. We all walk out into the sunshine, kind of dazed, like, holy cow, it worked. This kind of crazy experiment. And we go to the press tent, And Chris gets up and proceeds to spill the beans about what the movie means and what actually happened. And when he finished answering questions, I sort of caught up with him as we were walking over to dinner, and I said, don't do that again. Let's not do that. Let's kind of leave it. Let's sort of leave it up to the audience, because what my point to him was, as soon as he sort of gives out his interpretation, his theory on it, it becomes the definitive one. In every film argument, and every argument about it, this is what, with Blade Runner, with this sort of, is Deckard a replicant? Well, Harrison Ford says no, but Ridley Scott says yes. And
and then there was the director's cut. Absolutely.
And then there's the director's cut, and it becomes more or less definitive. I was never a big fan of ambiguity in a kind of masturbatory sense. It was sort of just trying to mess with the audience. Memento is very deliberately ambiguous because that's the character's situation. So we went to have dinner right afterwards, and I saw Guy Pearce last night at the premiere, and we were laughing about this too. There was a point where you got Guy, Chris, myself, the producers, Jennifer and Suzanne Todd, and Aaron Ryder, and a bunch of other people who'd worked on the movie, and they're all sitting around this table in Italy and having this massive argument about what the movie we just made meant, and no one could agree with each other, which is kind of fun, It's either really bad or really good.
One of the interesting things about this film, since it's about magic, is very early on, by showing secrets to tricks and getting into the magicians' minds of seeing how they want to figure out each other's secrets, it kind of minimizes the magic. But then somewhere it would seem late in Act 2, when Tesla starts paying off for the turning point for Act 3, if I'm getting the turning point right, it really does go into the fantastical. Yeah. An element that keeps you figuring all the way till the end. Could you talk about the involvement of Tesla in the book and how that kind of changed in your adaptation for the screen?
Yeah, one of the things we realized when as I said, Chris had pitched me the story first, so I had a pretty good idea that it was going to go supernatural before I started reading the book. And one of the concerns we knew right from the beginning was a genre consideration of, you really have to try to let the audience know as quickly as possible that you're going to go there. If you're going to break the rules of nature, you have to be clear, as clear as you can from the beginning, which is very much what we tried to do. And part of the reason why the narrative structure is structured the way it is you can get Cutter up there pretty early saying, "Look, this thing is real," at least raising the question in the audience's mind. Okay, are they going to go there or not? Tesla. The more work I did on the screenplay, the more impressed I was with the work that Christopher Priest had done on the novel. He's loaded this book with all these wonderful sort of binary relationships, like Tesla and Edison. I mean, their relationship is so much like the relationship of the two magicians in the film. It's a little frightening. The more research I did into Tesla, the more I realized what a brilliant Promethean character he is to, if you're going to go there, if you're going to go into the sort of super scientific, if you will, Tesla's the guy to take you there. After the research that I did, and I went out to Colorado Springs and kind of drove around and tried to find what was left of Tesla's stay there. And after the reading that I did, I remain, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I remain convinced that the experiments that he did with the light bulbs are pretty well documented. He did that, and that was his plan, was to try to electrify the planet, give away electricity. Having invented alternating current, his idea was, well, you just let the genie out of the bottle and give it away for free. And shortly after that, his lab in New York burned down, and he had to move to Colorado Springs, and then his financing was cut off. He's a fascinating figure. I bump into executives out here, producers, tons of them who have been trying to sort of develop a Tesla project.
Yeah, there's a lot floating around, actually.
Yeah.
Last question, we're going to open up to the crowd. Your habit, when you write, how many hours a day would you say you write? What do you do to battle writer's block?
Yeah, it's funny. For years, I didn't stop laughing. Jordan's got the office down the hallway from mine up at Warner Brothers, so he knows how much I write. For years, I didn't understand the concept of writer's block. I was like, "What's that?" And then I realized a few weeks ago, I was like, "Oh, that's every day." My thing about writing is it's like a lot of the best things in life. If it's not hard work, you're not doing it right. And I find writing to be a lot of the times agony. I'm lucky if I can get 5 good hours of work in a day. It often takes 10 hours of wandering around and yelling at people and eating candy bars and talking to yourself and babbling and that kind of stuff.
Right on. That's great. We're going to open it to the crowd. Right there, you, sir, in the red. Question was regarding nonlinear structuring. There was definitely nonlinear structuring that worked great in Memento. How did nonlinear structuring work into this once you decided to throw out the very easy framing device of grandchildren or great-grandchildren investigating their grandparents, great-grandparents' diaries?
Well, the book itself is riddled with and layered with different narrative devices. You have the journals that bounce back and forth in a kind of Rashomon structure. So the book itself invites you to mess around with time a little bit, but I think anytime I want to work with Chris, I know that's a ball game we can play around with that stuff, and there's an invitation to do that every time.
Would you have to do multiple passes to make sure that your structural elements are paying off? Because each of the 3 storylines that I was tracking definitely has a beginning, middle, and end. Definitely has a 3-act structure.
Definitely.
Would you do a pass for?
I think a lot of that is subconscious, and then you also realize that, and I've done this enough now at this point with Chris to realize that a lot of the nonlinear narrative structure is going to be changed in the editing room. A lot of the things that you think you can do on the script, you can get the broad strokes in there, but you're not going to be able to solve the problems that the director and the editor are going to have to figure out in the editing suite. So you have to build a kind of flexibility into it. This film versus the shooting script that I think was just published, there are substantial differences. There are not in content, but in structuring. Because you just look at it and it's like, okay, well, this is feeling like you can slide these 2 things together. What's remarkable about that, and the reason why playing with narrative structure is always seems to be a feature of everything that I've worked on, and everything that Chris has worked on, even Batman Begins, because the audience will go there. I mean, the audience is remarkably flexible in what they can absorb and what they can process and what they can put together, and there's a fun there to it as well. I think if it's handled right.
And nonlinear is also modular, which means you could shift it around, which makes it a little easier. A few more questions. Right here, you, ma'am, in the middle. There's a great duality in the screenplay. There's the rivalry. There's Edison and Tesla. There's the doubles, etc. How much of your own rivalry, how much of your own relationship ended up in the screenplay?
Not much. Thankfully, Chris and I have a pretty banal relationship compared to the sort of hijinks that these guys get up to. But I get out subconsciously. I don't know. No idea.
Another question. Right here, you, sir, on the aisle. The interesting question was, just to repeat it, sometimes when he writes and he finds out that a project that is similar to what he's working on is going into production, he questions whether or not to keep writing or whether or not to stop. Obviously, Illusionist opened about 4 or 5 months ago before this. When you guys found out about that project, which is very different and great in its own way, was there ever consideration, maybe we shouldn't do this, or had you been working on it so long that there was no way in hell you're giving up?
To a certain degree, the phenomenon that I've figured out is that when I'm working on an idea and I'm really excited about it, and you got that thing of, that kind of eureka thing going on where it's like, this is going to be awesome. And then you go to a movie theater, because you're blocked or whatever, and you go to a movie theater and you're watching a trailer, and a trailer comes on, and it's like, oh no. And you get that awful feeling. What I've figured out at this point is pretty much anything that's remotely similar to your thing elicits that feeling if you're in the wrong mood, and then you need someone else to sort of help you step back and say, dude, what are you talking about? They're completely different things. But the truth is, so you have to kind of fight that feeling. I say just go ahead. It doesn't, you know what I'm saying? I think at every point we were making a movie, at some point, and Memento in particular, there are a couple other projects where people were like, well, it's kind of similar. It's kind of...
Like what?
I'm not familiar with the specifics of them. Some of them are still out there in development land. But okay. There are a lot of bright people out here writing scripts. And you can't, there are only so many good ideas in the world, It's really kind of you just have to sort of keep battling on with it, I think. And then, it's funny because there are these sort of conspiracy theories about how Hollywood produces 2 of the same movie over and over and over again. 2 Lombarda movies and 2 earthquake movies, and now 2 magician movies. And what's funny is, having been on the inside of one of these things, I can officially say there's no conspiracy. It's just coincidence. These things happen. My brother told me when I was first moving out here in '99, he said, don't come because everyone out here writes about the same stuff. And it's kind of true, but you just kind of have to go with it,
Time for 1 or 2 last questions. Right here in the front row. Pacing is an issue. This is about 2 hours and 15 minutes, but it really flies by. How conscious were you guys of your pacing?
with the exception of Following, I think most of Chris's films are converged on that they're kind of sweet spot right past 2 hours. And I think I think that's probably a coincidence, but the pacing, for me at least, if I stopped and thought about that too much, I think I'd probably go nuts. There's so many different things to worry about with a script that the pacing seems to be one of these things that works okay subconsciously. I've watched a lot of movies. I'm sure a lot of people here have. I mean, I love movies. I always have. And I think, hopefully, I've taken on some of that sort of, by watching movies that kind of comes naturally. Although it's funny, sometimes you can't anticipate. You get interested in something, and then you watch the audience, and it's like, wait, they're not as interested in that as I thought they would be.
Last tough question of the night. Only you can answer it. Are you really Jonah Nolan, or are you Chris Nolan in Jonah makeup?
The whole brother act thing is just for tax purposes.
Let's give it up for Jonah and Chris Nolan, then.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Thanks again to Jonathan Nolan for showing up and spending time with us. It was a great episode, and there were a few things that we took out of it, actually. Very minor. I'm talking I think 5 minutes. It was specifically about stuff in the ending, and I think I'm going to try and, do a few follow-up questions with Jonathan and put that stuff up later in the year after The Prestige has been in theaters for a while. So, keep your eyes and ears open out for that. But, it would mean more anyhow if you saw the film. So it didn't really belong. Don't forget to refresh your iTunes each Friday, because that's when we post new sessions. So the new one will be downloaded for you automatically. And I'm Jeff Goldsmith, Senior Editor for Creative Screenwriting Magazine, thanking you for tuning in, and we'll be back with you next Friday.